morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we get to look at a new Barraskewda card. The second Barraskewda card we've ever seen. And I tell you what, the first one was actually kind of interesting. And this new one is actually kind of interesting. Let's have a look, shall we? Though a quick note as always, not as always, but as often lately, our translation comes from the lovely Antoine Boulet, friend of the channel and frankly, one of our favourite people over here. And what we see as we start off, having a little bit of a look at the stats, we've got 120 HP, which isn't absolute trash garbage for a stage 1. It's alright. I mean, there's a big difference between 120 and 130. There's a lot of Pokemon that naturally hit 120, so 130 would be better, quite frankly. Never mind. We got a retreat cost of 1, which means free retreat with U-turn board, which is always a nice thing. We got a weakness to lightning, but honestly, I don't really care. There just aren't that many relevant lightning Pokemon hitting weak numbers at the moment. Like Raikou hits 120, Pikachu and Zekrom hits 150. I suppose Boltund will get a slightly easier KO. But honestly, Boltund will get a 2 energy KO, which is easier. But this is not exactly a huge difference if we're being honest. And you are a water Pokemon. Being a water Pokemon ain't too bad. Means you got Frostmoth to accelerate a little bit of energy if you need to. Means you're hitting weakness on all of those pesky welded X, which is quite nice. So, you know, could be worse. It gives you access to Capacious Bucket. If you want to search out that energy from your deck, you're more than welcome to do so. So that's kind of nice. But really, it is the attacks we are worried about here. So, starting off, according to Antoine, what we've got is 1 energy, and it does 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon for each damage counter on that Pokemon. I really, really like this. And we actually have a parallel at the moment. This is an extremely similar attack to Esper. Now, Esper for free energy, now it is a basic Pokemon, but 60 HP free energy compared to 120 HP 1 energy, I think I'm going to be willing to evolve here. Esper does 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon for each damage counter on that Pokemon. I.e., the attack here is exactly the same as Esper, but for 1 energy rather than free, on a Pokemon with double the HP. Yes, I know you've got to evolve, but it really is only a stage 1. I think we're going to be okay. And basically, I just see this as a better version of Esper, and Esper's been a really nice Pokemon. Now, I do have one little regret here, and that is that Ditto Prism Star is rotating. This is exactly the kind of surprise Pokemon that you could absolutely get a cheeky KO on using Barraskewda. I mean, let's say for argument's sake you're playing a Pikachu and Zekrom deck, and you could stomach playing 1 copy of Aurora Energy or something like that. An energy that could count as water, or even a basic water if you really wanted to. All of a sudden, Pikachu and Zekrom is either hitting for 150, and then your opponent retreats to the bench, or they hit 170 to the bench. Well, if you've hit 150 to a Pokemon, Barraskewda comes in and hits for 300 damage. Oh. I mean, let's take something like an Eternatus VMAX, the biggest, baddest Pokemon we've got in the game at the moment. Okay. 340 HP. You need to do 120 to Eternatus. You do 120 to Eternatus, and then when it's on the bench, and it does have to be on the bench, you can't hit the active, which is kind of upsetting. That's a translation we've got from Antoine. It's also the deal with Esper. But then again, if you're really that worried, remember there is a Fione in the format at the moment, that if it's on the bench, you can put it on the bottom of your deck and make your opponent switch their active. So if you want to make your opponent switch, if you're worried they're going to stay in the active, you're fine. And now, when they've got 120 on, you hit them for 240 on the bench, which adds up to 360. Boom, you're off. What I'm saying here is, any Pokemon that can hit 120 damage can lead to a 2-hit KO with Barraskewda. Now, worried about your opponent healing? Remember that in Darkness Ablaze, we just got Mimikyu. So, Mimikyu basically says, hey, your bench Pokemon can't be healed. Remember that. Okay, fine, they can heal if they stay in the active. But you can see my point here. I love this. This is basically a 2-hit KO on anything. The reason I like it so much with Ditto is because your opponent just might not see it coming. Like, if they don't know that you're playing Barraskewda, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, what's that Ditto going to turn into? Oh, a Barraskewda that's taking free prizes. And I don't care. If I hit my opponent and I get a KO with Barraskewda next turn, I do not care even a little bit if my opponent is taking a KO every turn. Because they're 1-hit KOing for 1 prize and I'm 2-hit KOing for 3 prizes. Maybe Barraskewda isn't going to be good enough against single prize Pokemon, but just don't play an all Barraskewda deck. One of my first reactions, and the energy line is going to be janky here, but it's that Raikou I mentioned earlier. For free energy, you do 120 to the active, 120 to one of your opponent's bench. Bearing in mind, you got stuff like Tapu Koko, Prism Star, Turbo Patch. There are ways to accelerate the energy here. So I do 120 to the active, 120 to the bench, and remember, as soon as I do 120 to the bench, Barraskewda can KO any Pokemon on the bench regardless of who it is. And now, against single prize decks, I should be constantly taking double prizes with Raikou, and against multiple prize decks, I'm setting myself up to win in a couple of turns with Barraskewda. This is, from a personal standpoint, one of my favourite Pokemon we've seen in ages. If you can spread a little bit of damage round, or even just have a bunch of single energy, fairly efficient attacks, especially ones that hit the bench as well, all of a sudden, you're only really worried about your opponent healing, but now we've got a card that basically stops your opponent healing unless they stay in the active. Some will be able to. Not all of them will be able to. And that's kind of ridiculous. I mean, if we go back to Esper, the popular way to play this was to play it with Roxy. Remember, Roxy lets you discard 2 Pokemon from your hand, up to, and then draw 3 cards for each one discarded, and you've got both the Coughing and Wheezing, which, if discarded with Roxy, will put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. So that's kind of cool. Don't forget the Galarian Zigzagoon will drop a damage counter when you play it, and you can use Scoop Up Net to pick it up and go again. Don't forget that we've got Salamence here. Salamence just came out in Darkness Ablaze, and it is, as I record this, now legal. Oh, well, not legal, but it's out. You can go and buy it. You can't play it for 2 weeks, but you can buy it. And Salamence, for free energy, I'm thinking Welder here, drops or does 3 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. So after a few turns of this, everything on your opponent's board gets into Barraskewda range. And of course, I showed you Orbeetle V Max earlier that says that once during your turn, if it's active, you can place 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. There is a good reason that Esper was never particularly great and remains a fringe deck. Too expensive. Free energy. Which means all of a sudden I'm building my deck to try and make sure I've got the energy on Esper. Here, it's just a stage 1 Pokemon for a single energy. And you can use Aurora energy if you want to. So any Pokemon that can spread decent damage, or even just a bunch of Pokemon just hitting for 120, and then all of a sudden your opponent is staring down Barraskewda that can KO anything. I think this is going to be a Pokemon that is overlooked by a lot of people, and I think this is a genuinely good Pokemon. Either you just put it in as a 1-1 or 2-2 tech in any deck that's not getting giant one-hit KOs, which is most of them, or you can actually build some kind of dedicated spread, or I want to call it a poke deck. I'm talking about stage 1 or basic Pokemon that hit for a little bit of damage. And then Barraskewda finishes them off. I really do love this first attack, and I look at this in a way that I never looked at Esper, because that single energy means I can either tech it in, or I can play a bit of Barraskewda Swarm with a bunch of other single energy attackers, and I am never going to worry about running out of energy because I've got all single energy attackers. Now, as for the second attack, 2 energy, 60 damage, clearly I'm not particularly in love with this. It's not particularly good. It is, as a fun little side note, the right amount of damage to get a KO on that Volcanion that most fire decks still play. Again, they got 120 if they had 130, they'd survive, but they don't, so they won't. I think Barraskewda is that classic Pokemon that I'm going to overrate, that I'm going to like a lot more than other people, and that I'm going to play around with trying to make it work when everybody else has already decided it's not good enough. But that ain't going to stop me giving it 4 Wassies, because my honest opinion is that this is a really good Pokemon in spread decks. You can build a deck around it. In terms of, I've got a bunch of Pokemon that hit 120, either I'm hitting weakness and KOing, or I'm finishing with Barraskewda. And I think it can be a fun tech in a bunch of other decks. I think it's really good. But there's a comment section if you think I'm wrong. Go nuts. I think I'm right. Let's have a chat. Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassie, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing is always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.